Good morning, afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us. You'll see 3 questions on your screen. If we could ask for you to post your answers in the chat, we'll give everyone a couple of minutes to do that, and then we'll start formally in just 1 minute's time. Please be sure when you post your questions, you send it to all panelists and attendees. There's an option there just before you type the message to make sure everyone can see your contributions. Okay, we'll make a start. I'm going to leave this screen up so people who are joining can continue to see the questions, but I am going to pass over to Mr. Andy Jones, the Director of Sport at Dubai College and Chair of DASA, the Dubai Affiliated School Sports Association. Andy, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. And thanks to you all who have joined us today. What promises to be a fascinating look at how we're going to get different schools and countries adapting PE to the new challenges presented by the global COVID pandemic. Although what is going to be done is probably going to be based on government directives, I'm confident that every school will share their ideas as to what is working best for them and what we can all actually learn from. In addition to schools, I'm delighted to have Kate's contributions and welcome Will from the Youth Sports Trust UK. I'm sure your insights into the UK's ideas on a safe return to curriculum PE will be enlightening to us all. Finally, Ed, today's presenter and head of DASA CPD, has been busily creating a document which is a summary of the return to PE literature from sporting and educational bodies around the world. This document will be shared with all following today's webinar. So in summary, Guy Begley from Geelong Grammar School, Australia, Helen Matthews from Dulwich College, Shanghai, Lewis Keynes and Alan Dunstan from British School, Manila, Dave Ratcliffe, Tanglin Trust School, Singapore, Chris Wade, British School, Netherlands, Kate Thornton Bousfield and Will Straith from the Youth Sports Trust, Taif Al-Delamy from Valiant Clinic, and Ed and Neil as DASA lead panelists. Thank you so much for your time and willingness to present today. My final thanks is to all attendees joining us, and I'm confident you'll have a fascinating hour and a half of useful insight and a chance to ask questions to all members of the panel. So Ed, over to you.
Thank you very much, Andy, and welcome everyone. At the moment, 282 of you. Welcome to the DASA DXBPE Safe Return to PE webinar. Thank you for giving up your Sunday afternoon, morning, whatever it may be, evening perhaps, to be here. DXBPE is the professional development branch of DASA, representing 80 schools here in Dubai and rising really. We're open to everyone though, and we'd encourage and like everyone to attend any future sessions as a global PE community. And this is really the core ethos of DASA CPD, DXBPE, tapping into the expertise of people within our subject. It's professional development for teachers, by teachers, and really tapping into that in a subject that we all love, and engaging in the local and global conversation to provide the best opportunities possible for our students. So before we all formally introduce ourselves, Andy mentioned our names there as well, we'd like to know a little bit about you. So I'm going to post a poll, and it's going to ask you a few questions. Panelists, feel free to answer also, and this is going to pop up on your screen. All right, I'm just going to leave that running for a little while we introduce ourselves. Okay, so first of all, one of my co-hosts today, Neil Statham. Neil, just give us a wave so people can see who I'm talking about. There he is. Head of PE at Heartland International School, Dubai, senior teacher as part of the senior leadership team. He's also served as chair and vice chair of DASA and is currently a member of the DASA Executive Committee. I'm also joined as a co-host with Will Swades. Hi Will, former teacher, advanced skills teacher, specialist leader of education, also former head of PE and achievement at the Youth Sport Trust, and now working closely with the Youth Sport Trust, Loughborough University and other institutions on initial teacher training and providing professional development workshops for schools in Nottinghamshire and beyond. All right, so thank you Neil and Will for hosting with us today. Myself, haven't introduced, my name's Ed Mosley, head of PE at North London Collegiate School Dubai and DASA CPD coordinator. We also have with us today Dave Radcliffe, head of PE at Tanglin Trust Singapore. Thanks, Dave. Lewis Keynes, director of activities and sport at British School Manila. Mr. Alan Dunstan, head of PE at British School Manila. Chris Wade, head of PE at British School Netherlands. And we also have interviews with Taif Al-Delami, who's an exercise and rehab specialist with Valiant Clinic, Kate Thornton Boosfield, who is the current head of PE and achievement at the Youth Sport Trust, and Guy Begley, head of PE at Geelong Grammar. Right, managed to get all that through. So that's the team today. We also may be joined by Helen Matthews, head of PE at Dulwich College Shanghai. She'll be joining us shortly. So this is the 7th webinar we've done as DXBPE and DASA over this period of online learning. And during that time, we've had over 2,500 teachers from every continent in the world join us in these webinars. With just over 500 of you registering today, and at the moment, 293 with us. So that's really powerful stuff. And we like to think that has improved the experience of PE for many hundreds and thousands of students around the world. But if you leave here today with just one idea, one nugget of gold, one piece of inspiration that might provoke a positive change in your school, then as far as we're concerned, it's been a success. But that all starts with you turning up and being here and registering and again, giving up your time. So a thank you to you. Your students are very lucky to have such passionate and dedicated teachers. Twitter, if you're on Twitter, today's hashtags to engage in the conversation are hashtag #ReturnToPE and hashtag Global PE Perspectives. We'll post that in the chat so people can see, but please comment and engage in that conversation. If you're not on Twitter, after this webinar, make a professional account and get on it. This is how all these people here today have been connected, the power of Twitter. An important thing today for you guys to engage with us as panelists and for us to help you get into a better position for returning to PE is the Q&A tool. So you'll notice there's a chat function that you've been filling nicely, thank you very much, but there's also a Q&A tool. Now we want to use that the most. Please post your questions in here for the panelists or general questions you might have, and not so much in the chat. Within the Q&A, you can vote for questions, you can give them a thumbs up, and the questions with the most votes will move up the order. This will help prevent nuances of the same question, and we can get right down to it, what you guys want to know, and try and answer that. The Q&A section is at the end of the webinar, so it's one of the best things and the best part of the webinar, so we'll get to that at the end. But we won't answer your questions directly live as you post them, so please don't get offended. We're just waiting for those votes to come in, and so we can answer the most popular questions at the end, and we'll do as many as we can, time permitting. So the structure of the session, it's 90 minutes, that's what we're aiming for. Game of 2 halves it will be. The first half is going to be practicalities around returning to PE, trying to paint a picture for you and help you imagine what it's going to be like when you return to school, or if you're already at school, what your experience might be in compared to others. We're also going to present a summary of international guidance, as Andy said at the beginning, and we're going to have some shared experiences from Singapore the Netherlands, and Shanghai, who are already back at school. At half time, you will need, and panelists, I hope you've got yours, a pair of socks, clean preferably. Neil mentioned he's going to take them off his own feet live in the session. I hope he doesn't. But you'll need a pair of socks for the half-time interval. And after half-time, we'll be hearing about the perspective of the UK and Youth Sport Trust. We're going to have a reflection on our PE curriculums and our why as teachers. We're going to look at the physical education gap, injury prevention on return to PE, and then we've got a Q&A, and we're just going to wrap it up. So 2 distinct sections that you can look forward to. Right, that's the introduction done. I'm going to end the poll, so this should show you all the breakdown. So 18% from the UK. Thank you guys for joining us. 71% from the UAE, and we've also got elsewhere in the Middle East, Asia, North America, and also Africa and Oceania. Well, thank you for joining us, everybody. 96% of you have not yet returned to PE. Okay, so that's good for us to know. Most of you are confident about PE and returning to school, but about a third are slightly nervous about that. And concerns that we have: student mental and social well-being, that's a given, safety of staff, or you could select multiple there, and we're pretty much saying everything is important, but the most adhering to health and safety guidelines to enable PE to happen. I think this session will really help you do that. So, oh, I didn't even share the results. There you go. There's the results shared. Right. I'm now going to do the presentation of the summary of international guidance. So just give me a moment to share my screen. Thought I'd be good at this by now after all these months of teaching online. Right, here we go. Panelists, give me a thumbs up. Can everyone see that? Yeah, lovely. Okay, so now this document, which you will receive via email, has compiled, I've basically read 21 other documents or references from around the world. And I've created a 5-page summary. Here's some of the sources of information that have been referred to within that document. Not directly referred to, but if things have been common between, then they feature. The most recommended for you as PE teachers have the star here next to them. So the Association for PE, check out their guidelines, and PADSIS, returning to school sports, rebooting school sports. Also, if you're from Dubai, like many of you are, check out the Dubai Sports Council procedures for returning to sports in Dubai. That will really give you a good insight. And for anybody who has a pool at their school, Swim England have an excellent document on that as well. So the reason behind me creating this document, first of all, it's a starting point for you to give you informed discussions with your senior leadership to ensure that PE takes place in your school and is done so safely when you return to school. SLT may be worried about PE, and we want them to avoid the possibility of just saying, right, no PE this term. You know, we don't want that to happen. They might not have the headspace to think about safe PE. So this document will help you take it to them and show them how it can be done. I've even made a summary of the summary just for senior team members that is even more concise, the things they really need to know about timetabling and things like that. So hopefully that helps. The key principle of this document, there is no list of exactly what you can and cannot do. Okay, everywhere I've read, it's a local context. Where you are, it may be different. Now, this diagram you can see here shows that it starts with the government. The government will give their guidelines and their rules. then your employer will interpret those rules for your school and for your context. Okay, and then we get to the PE department. You must listen to what your employer says, not what DASA says and what document we will share with you, and not even so much what the government says. The government will just give a framework for schools to work within. Okay, and some of those with us today might say more about that at the end, because ultimately everyone has different size sports halls. You have an indoor pool, an outdoor pool, different facilities, age ranges, etc., and the rules vary, the guidelines vary depending on that. So we have to navigate our way through that. So again, guidelines only, not rules, not something you need to take exactly the way it's written. Okay, make sure it applies and you interpret it for your context. And also, it's worth saying that the document was, I finished it a few days ago on the 15th of June, 18th of June. Things might have changed even by now, and they certainly will over the next couple of weeks. So you've got to, it's your responsibility to keep up to date, look at the Association for PE. If you're from Dubai, keep up to date with the Dubai Sports Council and your local government wherever you are in the world. So the document is split into these categories. Okay, I've tried to make it as purposeful as possible. So first of all, I'm just going to fly through it really quickly because I'm going to send it to you to read anyway. Some things we're all going to need to think about. Cleaning schedules, that's a whole school issue. You can't just expect the cleaners to be there in PE. They're going to have to clean things in art and biology and elsewhere around the school. So that's a whole school decision. Routines in PE, such as washing hands after lessons, particularly in the earlier years when they might not be as disciplined with touching each other and equipment. Lots of notices and signage, thinking about limiting the use of equipment. Pretty much everything I've read says that children come to school in PE kit on PE days. There's no changing. Change rooms are pretty much closed. Chris and Dave nodding there as well. I think that's the case in their schools. And the use of masks, which many people might want to know about, varies between schools. Here in Dubai, you'll know that if it's vigorous activity, you're allowed to lower or remove the mask, but light and moderate activity, you should have a mask on. I know in Beijing in China, they had some health issues with children exercising with masks on, so then they were allowed to remove the masks. So again, government guidelines, local context. Curriculum design and planning, I recommend, there's links in the document, but the Physical Health Education of Canada lists a lot of activities that are recommended that help with social distancing. But just please make sure that what you plan is inclusive. You keep the E in PE, which we'll talk about more later. And it focuses not just on the physical, but on our job as a subject returning to school is going to be much more than that. We're going to have to be really creative. It will probably have to be non-contact and think about individualized play, things children can do safely on their own, not backflips and things like that in gymnastics, obviously, but really have a good think about that. Equity, inclusion, and accessibility. Your children, they're all going to come from different experiences. They might have been locked up in an apartment for many weeks. They might have lost someone in their family. There could be trauma there. That could compound other issues they previously had. All right, so you must be aware of that. There's obviously going to be a physical impact. Some might come back in the best shape of their life, particularly those ones that might not have been engaged previously, and the ones that really were engaged might have just fallen off the wagon and not done anything. Involve students in that decision-making process because of those first 2 points. They will know what they're ready for. And just consider, here, this diagram on the right, everything. Again, they're going to have to relearn lots of skills. We're not just talking physical skills, we're talking how to work together, how to think, how to problem solve, how to communicate, especially here in Dubai when we've had 15 weeks of online learning plus the summer holidays. It's going to be a long, long time since they've been in school. I put Chris on this one. I looked at Chris's Twitter. at the British School of the Net. The one in circles is not from Chris's school. That's just a random New York image. But consider social distancing. There's lots of activities we can do, but government guidelines vary from around the world between 8 people in a room up to 40, depending on the space. It's sometimes based on square meters. But lots of them say no small spaces. For example, your indoor fitness suite or converting an indoor classroom for PE, unless it can be well ventilated. Things like treadmills need to be spread more than 2 meters apart, particularly if people are doing vigorous exercise on them. Now, for the early years teachers, there is an acknowledgement in the documents that that's obviously much harder and less likely to be able to social distance young children. But things like extra supervision or putting them into what's called bubbles, smaller groups that stay together throughout the day, can really help. And finally, swimming. Here's some images for those of you that might have swimming pools, buckets, people to put your kids in, arriving to swimming with your swimming kit on underneath already. Again, changing rooms are not open. You can see the social distancing within the pool, waiting at the end of the 5 meters on the lane rope, and limited numbers in the lanes. Even with chlorine and everything like that, these are the current guidelines. And finally, cleaning anything that's had kit in at the end. But for swimming, if you are interested, this is the best document I've found so far. Swim England's Returning to the Pool, published just last week. They have lots of diagrams like that one to show you how to maybe set up your pool to get maximum participation whilst maintaining a safe environment. Okay, within the document, lots of links on the last page, but again, highly recommend Association for PE's practical self-review tool for your context, PADSIS, and again, government, and involve and engage your senior team. You can't make these decisions on your own. You've got to be part of that conversation. Okay, lovely. I'll share that as well via email afterwards. Right, that is my section done. A reminder, if you've got questions from that I've just been going through, post them in the Q&A, give them a thumbs up and a vote if there is something you want to know more about, and we can come back to that at the end. We're now going to move on to shared experiences with Dave Radcliffe and Chris Wade, from Dave from Tanglin Trust Singapore and Chris from the British School of the Netherlands. So gentlemen, my first question is going to go to Dave. Dave, could you outline what a typical day at your school, not just PE, but your school, looks like at the moment? And then Chris will come to you next.
Hi everybody. Yeah, so we've been back in school now 3 weeks, and we have a few more weeks to go before the end of term. We were in lockdown for around 10 weeks, and then we came out of that, and we were allowed to have 50% of, or no more than 50% of the children in school at any one time. We're a 3 to 18 school, so what that looked like for infants, juniors and seniors was quite different. So seniors, we have alternate year groups coming on each day. So year 8, 10, 12 would come in Monday, Wednesday, Friday. 7, 9, 11 would come in Tuesday, Thursday, and then that would reverse on the following week. The juniors and infants, they have 50% of each class in every day. So, and that alternates each day. And that's largely around the options that students in senior school take, the different, the environment in the junior and infant school and the way they teach their classes. So when the students arrive at school, they're dropped off at school either by bus or by parents, and no parents are allowed on site. So even children as young as 4 years old, they're handed over at the gate, and we have members of staff who receive them. Seniors obviously arrive a little bit more independently. Every student passes through a thermal scanner on one of 2 gates, and they have to display their temperature, which they have taken at home. So that's just a double check. When they arrive in their classroom, each student has to, senior school that is, they log in with a QR code on each desk. So at every step of the way throughout the day, senior schools, we know which desks and which classrooms they've sat at. Obviously, juniors and infants, they don't move between classes because they're taught by the class teacher. But with just half the students in the class, of course, they're separated or socially distanced, as we would call it. So in senior school, it's a little bit more challenging with the curriculum and the option subjects. Obviously, when it's year 8 languages, then you have 3 or 4 different languages which different students have to go to. But what we have done is we've ring-fenced, if you like, different parts of the school. So year 7, they have all their lessons on one floor. Rather than moving to teachers in different classrooms, the teachers now move to the students. So students are only allowed in certain parts of the school. And that goes back really to the heart of this, in that the community spread in Singapore is not particularly high, touch wood. But hopefully with the measures taken, the school is a pretty safe place. However, if we were to face a situation where one of the students was diagnosed with the virus, we would instantly have to provide information to the government of who they have been in contact with in terms of close contact throughout the day. Hence the desk arrangements, every lesson for every child. So we'll be able to give that evidence and to the government immediately, because obviously all those students that have been in close contact for a period of time, it would have to be quarantined. So it's important really that the school is able to track and trace the movements of students throughout the day, which obviously does make it a little bit more challenging. Students find themselves sat in the same desk for long periods of time. They go and get their lunch, they have to return back and sit at a desk and eat there. Everybody in Singapore, when they're outside of their own home, they have to wear a mask, and that's the law. Obviously, when they're doing PE, that's PE and eating are the 2 occasions when the students don't have to wear a mask. So I'm not going to lie, the school feels different. There's a lot of enthusiasm when we got back to school. Seeing familiar faces. It's a long time when you don't see students, 10 weeks, don't see colleagues. But it is different. There's half the number of students. There's a lot less talking because people are wearing masks. People tend to move around quite quietly. When you're teaching students in classrooms, if it's exam-based PE, it's difficult to teach children when you don't see the faces and you don't see their expressions, and they're just little signals that they give you when you're teaching them a concept or a topic. So you find yourself asking people quite regularly, do you understand what I'm saying? Because you don't actually get that feedback.
Dave, I'm going to interrupt you there for a second, because we're going to come on to the curriculum specifically, but I also want to give Chris a chance to jump in.
Yeah.
Chris, is there any key differences between your school day and Dave's school day there, before we get into PE and what that looks like specifically?
There's quite a few similarities and also some big differences, but the differences are really regional in the Netherlands compared to Singapore, really. We are about 1,200 students in the senior school, and I represent the senior school. We do have one smaller senior school, and we have a range of primary schools as well. Interestingly enough, our primary schools are back in full-time, no social distancing now. So that's totally different to what we're doing for 11 to 18. For the senior school, we don't have to wear masks in and around. It's only on public transport that masks are worn. So I think we avoid some of the issues that Dave talked about. We have, as I said, 1,200 students. We have alpha and beta groups they decided to do. So each form is basically split into 2. They stay in their form room all day, pretty much, apart from some key kind of individual subjects like food tech or design technology practical subjects, but for everything else they stay in there. They're assigned a desk, they stay at that desk as well. Yeah, when they come in, they're lined up outside 1.5 meter distances. all different entrances. We've got a one-way system around school as well, and key staircases have been assigned for year groups. It's sanitizing in, sanitizing out. And as far as PE goes, the biggest thing for us is we're not allowed to do anything indoors. And in the Netherlands, with the amount of rain that we have, that is makes it a bit challenging. But apart from that, it's not too bad. Not too bad.
Yeah.
And to move on, now you've started to touch on PE specifically, we might be able to draw some good parallels there. Obviously, in the UAE, it's not rain that's our problem; it's the extreme heat. So there's lots of questions coming in about that. But Chris, if we start with you, if you could just talk us through maybe with some examples from different phases, what PE actually looks like at the moment, from when children leave their classrooms to arrive. Can you talk us through what the process is of getting them from the classroom all the way to actually starting a lesson?
Yeah, because they're in their bases, at least Key Stage 3, Dave touched on options classes are a bit different when it comes to GCSE, A-level, etc. But with Key Stage 3, they're in their room. So we decided early on to go up and teachers will go up and collect them from their room. So we collect them and walk them down, making sure we keep 1.5 meter distance. When we get outside, as you saw from the image that Ed had put on from Twitter, we initially got them in form groups, combed out on the field 1.5 meters apart, and then we provided with some options. And then we did with those options, really, that we've had to carefully think about some of the things that Ed had put on about, you know, what equipment do they need, no equipment, spacing, has all been considered, but it's all very carefully measured out 1.5 meters, and carefully as well with how the staff will interact with students as well.
And Dave, to bounce that question over to your side, I think I'm right in saying, Tanguy, you've got over 2,500 students at the school. In terms of logistics of handling equipment and setting things out, what has that been like?
Yeah, so we're just under 3,000 when on the same site, which is not huge in terms of floor space. Because the juniors and infants have set up differently in terms of 12 kids per class, 12 students per class, they've largely taken the indoor spaces. Because in the senior school we have full year groups in at a time, the students are still in their full class. So what we've tried to do is we've tried to make their lessons outside in the main, bigger spaces. And also as well, I mean, we share the Netherlands and the UAE climate in some respects there, because it's very hot here and it's very wet. So we get the best of both worlds. And it's just difficult for the youngest children to be outside anything between 11 o'clock and 3 o'clock, really. In terms of equipment, we've tried to minimize the equipment that we use, of course. We're the same as everybody else, really. There's no invasion games, there's no shared equipment. And what we have tried to do is try to make it more active, physical activity, games-based fitness lessons, if you like, in the senior school, trying to make it as fun as possible, but just removing that shared equipment, which is a challenge. The juniors and infants, they've been able to use the equipment more because they've got small classes in a bigger space. So we're quite fortunate that 12 year fives in an entire sports hall, they can each have a ball each, which they then have to clean at the end of the lesson. So we are really adapting it based on the age, the size of the class, the facilities that they have. But the principle is really try and do without the equipment wherever possible. If there is any sharing, then it has to be cleaned at the end of the lesson. And we try and make sure that equipment which is there as the framework is the teacher that handles that, and the teacher moves it around. And we try and leave it out most of the day, because what we've tried to do is set up a carousel of activities. So students either during the lesson move around those different activities, or each lesson they will do a different activity. We are towards the end of the year, so we don't have that many lessons left. I think if we were to come back like this in August, start of a new term, then we probably have to think a little bit harder in terms of creativity of how are we going to maintain the engagement of these students over the longer term.
Thank you. And Chris, something that you and I talked about before this, British School Netherlands is obviously, I think you're significantly over 2,000 students at school as well. So with that is going to come a lot of staff and members of the PE department. How have things changed in terms of working conditions for teachers, lesson ratios, even all the way down to as simple as if you set the cones out at the start of the day, can I pick them up again? Can you just talk us through how you've managed the people in your department?
We have, with our options, kind of a carousel, I suppose, as well, with the things that we were doing. And we've gone from, and I mentioned to both of you before, jump rope, where they're cleaning a jump rope at the start and at the end, and hand sanitizing, so you can have something sort of fitness based, but also creative, putting routines and stuff together. And then we've got fitness, and we've got, I mentioned walking a bit as well. But what we do with each one of those is we have a member of staff on each one of those activities, and they stay on that activity. They are clued up and have introduced the COVID protocols as such to each one of the students. And then with the carousel, the staff stay on that piece of on that carousel option, so that when students come and rotate around, there's no issues with people making mistakes as much as possible. When it comes to how we're working and looking after each other, I mentioned it, as we sometimes with PE offices can be a little bit small. Ours is a reasonable size, but it has no windows, so ventilation has not been the best. We've been able to move into the cafeteria and space ourselves out, because there's no food being offered at school at the moment, packed lunches only. So that's one thing. And then it's just, there are numbers of teachers who you might have in your department who are maybe living with or partner with or have children who are in high risk categories. And that's something to consider as well. The school has been pretty flexible with that, which I think has been really, really good, in that with those who are significantly high risk categories, some of those teachers are not even coming in. And in addition to that, those who are living with students or even sometimes parents who are under high risk as well, are able to teach and actually then go home as well to minimize contact in and around school. So those are some of the things that have been put in place. And
Dave, has it been similar experience for you? Have you had to ask teachers to teach across different key stages, for example, in a through school that they might not have been used to before?
No, we have. I mean, the rules as set out by the government is that people should be working from home wherever possible across all industries, and schools is included in that. Because as in seniors, because we've got 50% in school, we've still got 50% of students on remote learning. So it's not uncommon that we might teach a school-based lesson period 1 and then go straight to period 2, where we have a remote learning, we have a call online with the students, and we use the various platforms to set them work, and then we're back to a school-based lesson. So that's a challenge, but the school has effectively closed or kept shut the whole administration side of the school, all the business side of the school. They're still working from home. So one whole building is closed, which actually has a sports hall in it, rather frustratingly. But also the faculty staff, we're encouraged to go home when we have finished our school business for any particular day. So we're effectively on flexi time. Teachers that have tutor groups, of course, they're in the morning. I don't have a tutor group. I go in period 2 for my lesson. And there's no stigma attached with a teacher coming in, teaching 2 lessons and then going home, because actually it's been actively encouraged just to minimize the contact between staff, minimize the people that are in offices. All meetings still have to be conducted online. So I ran a meeting on Friday where I had 4 people in the office alongside me, 3 people at home, and we did the whole meeting online. So I could hear myself on their computers while I was chairing the meeting, and it's quite difficult. But yeah, so it's very much flexible, just to minimize the number of people around at any one time.
Great. Dave, another one for you before you mute yourself again. What have been the real positives, either for your team as staff or for the students as well, in terms of them returning to PE? And then the flip side to that, have there been any, obviously you've mentioned some of the negatives, and I think lots of them are quite obvious. But yeah, what are the positives and negatives?
The positives are that the students have returned to school really enthusiastic, and really enthusiastic for PE. Actually, if you imagine that the students are sat with face masks on at one desk for most of the day, most of the week, the opportunity to come to PE, take off the mask, move around, and just that barrier that the mask brings, it changes the whole dynamic when students take the mask off. So what we found, even with our exam-based lessons, actually, is that when the students returned, they just wanted to see their friends. They just wanted to talk to their friends. They wanted to be around other people. And we see that in the lessons, actually, in the practical sessions, that we have a lot of buy-in to which I'll be honest, we're doing our best, but the lessons are a little bit dry. You know, there's no equipment, there's no balls, there's no games. So we're trying to make them as team-based, as sort of mini competitions within the context of what we're offering. But the buy-in has been outstanding, and students just enjoy being with each other. So that gives everybody a lift, because it is challenging. It is challenging. The negatives, we found that we have a carousel of fitness type activities, one being SAQ. So we have different like SAQ races using hoops, hurdles, and kids perform as teams. We have an interval session, which is very much agility based as well. And we had an aerobic, we had a whole aerobic session lined up where kids would kind of do like an aerobic relay, a little bit of an assault course type thing. And kids that have been sat around in their houses for 10 weeks, you bring them into that type of session with 35-degree heat and 90% humidity. We had to draw the intensity back a little. Let's say that. Yeah, we had a few anxiety panic attacks when students start to overheat, and so we just had to adapt really quickly to the reality that, you know, a lot of the students have been inactive for quite some time.
Okay, and Chris, if just to sort of bring this section to a close really, and then Dave will come to you just to finish it. What would be your top tips for those watching now that, you know, 96% of them have not yet returned to PE? What would you advise them? What would be your words of wisdom for them to, you know, when they go back to school?
I think collaboration really, and I think that's with the schools in and around your area, and the work that you've done, Ed, sort of collating all of that information as well is particularly helpful. Yeah, collaboration with your government, finding out all the details there, collaboration within your teams and trusting your teams to come up with creative ideas as well. And then put the protocols together and trust them to do that too. And also, I mean, reading some of the documents, I think the PHE one for Canada as well, about collaboration with students and giving them options as well. So giving them the choice of what they feel comfortable with coming back as well, because yeah, some of the sort of trauma elements of it, which does affect some students, not all. So collaboration, I think, would be the key part.
Thank you. And Dave, what would be your top tips?
Yeah, I would agree with Chris there, is just work with what you're given by the authorities, by your school. And then don't be afraid. Don't be afraid of it, because before our students came back, I sat with colleagues, and we were almost whipping ourselves up into a frenzy. Like, well, what if they touch this? And if students are breathing and the droplets are landing on the floor, and the kids sit on the floor and then they stand up, and you can start to be overtaken by all this. But, you know, students are still moving around in the real world. When they come to your subject, they'll be enthusiastic, embrace that. Don't expect too much. Your students will want to socialize, they'll want to be outdoors, they'll want to be active, and just use that to offer them something which they can enjoy. And yeah, what you can talk about the rules and the constraints, but when you actually get there into reality, you're dealing with 20, 24, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. You see the smile on their faces. They come to you talking to their friends. You might have to ask them to move apart a little bit quite regularly, but it isn't that scary prospect that it sounds when you're watching the news and you're seeing the rules and regulations. You still have those 24 excited young people in front of you, and it's okay. It's okay.
Brilliant. Chris?
Yeah, just to echo that as well, I find exactly the same as Dave. And then the other one that I would say was just consider mental, social well-being as well, exactly the same as Dave. They're so keen to socialize and just to be back, especially if they're in individual classes, which might be quite common, and then with that same group all day, every day. In your activities, consider how students can move around and actually engage with other groups.
Brilliant, thank you. So it's not all about getting everyone to do a bleep test on the first day to blast out the cobwebs. So for everyone watching, we've conducted 30, 40-minute interviews with Dave, with Chris, with Helen Matthews from Dulwich College, Shanghai, and with the head of PE at Geelong Grammar School in Australia. They're going to be on the DXBPE YouTube channel immediately after this webinar. So if you want to hear more about what Dave was talking about, or more about Chris and these other schools, you can watch those back in your own time. So this was just really a snippet to give you that picture within what it might be like for us when we return. And just a reminder, some of the questions have been great that you've been posting. Thank you. Keep voting. If you haven't posted a question, just take a look at the Q&A and give a thumbs up to some of those questions. The ones at the top of the list are the ones we're going to come back to and answer at the end. Will, over to you.
Yeah, so I was just going to extend just briefly on what Dave and Chris have been saying there. So yeah, unfortunately, Kate can't make it live onto this session, but I know that, again, there's a video for her, and I guess the official word from the Youth Sport Trust. I'm fortunate enough to still do quite a lot of work with them, but at the same time, I don't work for them full time anymore. So I'm speaking on behalf of me, which gives me some freedom, which is quite nice. But yeah, talking to colleagues across schools in England recently, I guess because key workers have been in school, the members of staff, particularly in PE, that have been in perhaps supporting that, it's really helped with that point, Dave, of familiarity and the nervousness around thinking, well, what can I do when trying out and having some success with a bit of archery or a bit of trampolining or some shooting games in basketball where they've got their own equipment, or and making sure they've got their clear protocol, making sure that they could never be accused of neglect or not considering how to make things safe. But absolutely, the things the children need the most is that social connection, the feeling valued and a part of the community again. So yeah, I know in our conversation, Ed, with Kate earlier in the week, it, I guess, touched on that thing that I'm very passionate about, is that idea of trying to spend the time during lockdown to really reflect on what matters, and are we spending too much time investing in skills and direct instruction and an ability to do, rather than building up young people's competence and more so confidence and desire to get on and do independently. So when you rip all of the framework of a school day away, how can you help them still be positive and give structure to their own day and get up and be active, etc., etc. And we discussed quite a bit about the stats across England, and the 8% of young people. Sport England have been sharing some really good stats week on week, and 8% of children literally have done nothing since lockdown. They've been stuck in, and in some instances I can see why that's a challenge. They live in a flat, perhaps a parent is shielding and they've got to stay in. But there's other instances where there perhaps isn't a strong reason or rationale for that. And then there's a further, I think, 32%, so bringing it up to 40% of kids have done less than 30 minutes of physical activity a day since lockdown. And that isn't necessarily the same children that were inactive before. So there might be some people that were really motivated by team sport and playing football and, you know, what came with structured competition. And now that's gone, they might be some of the people that have really versus others that find a way to collaborative.
Your audio went very strange then for a minute. Hold on. I'll try again. Say something. No. You've just turned into a transformer, Optimus Prime or something. Go on. You're back.
I'm back.
Carry on. So the last thing we heard was 40%, 30 minutes, less than 30 minutes a day.
And I guess the worry that 40% might be a different 40% to the previously inactive. So perhaps those engaged in competitive sport previously, now that's gone from their offer. Are they some of the children that are not exercising, whereas some others have found daily HIIT classes or going for a walk with the dog or whatever? They can find structure and meaning in a different sort of movement. So yeah, I think the big thing as children come back is trying to think about, well, where's the change happened? Who is it that needs me most as a PE teacher to try and help get you back on the movement train?
Perfect. So we're into extra time of the first half, Will. So I know you've got a bit of an activity for all these PE teachers watching.
Yeah, so this is where you need your socks, guys.
Got my socks.
So basically, I was just trying to think through that if we can't be advocates for physical activity, then who else will? All the evidence suggests that it's as dangerous to sit still for 90 minutes as it is to, loads of other stuff. So what I want you to do with your pair of socks is get on your feet. We're going to try and be a bit creative in this space. So I'm going to try and get you to push yourself out of your comfort zone and into practice mode. So you're going to be throwing and catching your socks, perhaps introducing claps in between your catches, perhaps a spin. You're trying to get to the tipping point where you start to fail. So we're looking for a bit of fun in failure. So Dave, that looks far too easy for you. You've got to make it harder. And I'm looking for about 40% mistakes. So that might mean for you, Lewis, you need to close your eyes perhaps. Yeah? So we're looking for throwing, clapping, catching, perhaps spinning round. If you've not dropped it yet, you're not pushing yourself into failure mode. That's where we need you to be. If anyone, we got, 303 people sat at home. If you're still sat down, we've got a problem here. You need to get up, you need to move. 10 more seconds. Okay, and let's get back down. So again, as I said, if we can't be the advocates for, yes, the importance of physical education, but also the importance of activity to get our minds into gear. I don't know if people have read Spark by John Ratey and all of the stuff around BDNF and how you concentrate better when you've been moving. Lots of our parents in this country have been talking about they'd like to pay teachers. They've just realised that teachers are worth an awful lot more than they're paid for managing that homeschooling. So enough from me. Lewis, Alan, great to have a bit of conversation again with you guys. I'm going to stop talking, but I just wanted to flag how much I've enjoyed not just the continuation of blogs since we last spoke, but also your now Infinite Leaders conversations and interviews that you've been doing. We may have time at the end to touch on some of that, but if we don't, people need to navigate to it and take a listen, take a watch, all right? But I think you're going to share a bit. We've got a fascination with Simon Sinek, haven't we, and asking why. So, Lewis, are you going to kick us off?
Yeah, we love asking why. Yeah, thanks a lot, Will, and thank you, Ed, and everybody here for what you're doing. I think it's absolutely superb. To be learning and sharing with others is, incredibly powerful at times like this, and I think that a lot of people will get a lot of really good stuff from this. So thanks again. I think that the angle Alan and I will come from will be to ask you a few questions and ask you to reflect a little bit. Really, this has given us such a time to pause and reflect about what we do as PE practitioners. And the two key questions that we are going to ask is, why is PE so important in schools? And what is the purpose of PE in your school? And I think any educator that's working in a PE or sports department needs to have a really clear idea about what the answer to both of those questions are, to allow them to move forward and to really make the most of the situation we're in. We know that PE has very different variations. Wherever you go in the world, there'll be similarities, and wherever you go, there'll be differences. And if you think of a PE curriculum as a recipe, it's changing. It's added a little bit of spice in recent years as opposed to a very traditional model in the past. But we're the people in charge of that recipe, and to have a rich curriculum requires a lot of thought about the ingredients you put in it. You need a clear purpose and a shared vision. And as Will alluded to there, we are fans of Simon Sinek and a why. Why are you doing what you're doing? And you could talk all day about ingredients. We're going to summarize them in 7 ingredients for you. A good PE curriculum might be including physical activity, sport in terms of the knowledge of sport and also the sport-specific skills that are delivered within it. Structured exercise and the importance of that. Physical literacy. There are about 35 different definitions of physical literacy floating about. No one knows which one's correct. But physical literacy, I think we all agree, is a really important part of a PE curriculum. Values, as we've already touched upon. Transferable and learning skills. And also the knowledge and application of why an active and balanced lifestyle is so important, and the broader well-being aspects about that, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. We all got really emotional when Joe Wicks called himself a PE teacher. And I think in many ways what Joe Wicks did was superb. He got people moving and he made that exciting. But it was really good that we reflected and thought to ourselves very much as a collective. I didn't speak to anybody who didn't. We're not just physical activity instructors for children. We're more than that. So the question is, what do you actually bring to the table as a PE teacher? And which of those 7 things are really important to you and your school's approach? You know, we talk about values. Values are really important. When I was back at university, it was very much phrased as a hidden curriculum, the things that sort of were taught in sport, but they weren't really addressed, and the things you should just sort of pick up along the way. And I had a really good conversation with Will 2 or 3 weeks ago about how the values might be the wheels of a vehicle, and PE being the vehicle, or whether they're the steering wheel and actually they drive everything that you do and they control the direction that you go in. You could even argue that the whole reason for doing it is values driven. You know, the educational psychologist Howard Gardner talked about, and I thought this was excellent, he talked about not how clever you are when you leave school, but how you are clever when you leave school. And he presents a multiple intelligence model to really start to discover, well, intelligence for different people means different things. And are we the subject that really has the freedom to explore a lot of these things? I touched upon it earlier, but a lot of traditional approaches to PE are still very, very sports driven. And that's the go-to for lots of PE teachers because, you know, a lot of the time that's what we're good at. We're very good team players. We know about team sports. It's what we played when we went through school. Is that solely what PE is about? Probably not. When we look to term 1, we know that team games isn't going to be something that we'd be able to do right from the start. We're going to have to be really creative. So do we persevere with team games, and do we water those down, and do we make those physical distance friendly? Do we care about the results of our teams and our extracurricular programs that much that we're going to affect a PE experience to enforce sports and enforce team games? And really, how can we utilize a range of approaches to learning in the context that you're in to make all the students better and more equipped for life? Now, that will depend upon your context and upon your why, and it will also depend on the kind of approaches that you and your team want to really put forward. But, you know, from a little bit of reading and from the experiences that we have, we know there are a number of approaches that work with children or that we feel work. A lot of them are sports-based, constraints-led approach, super, to challenge students and differentiate within games and within the context of games. Teaching games for understanding, the clue's in the title. It's all about games and making sure that children understand their role within a team and the specific skills and knowledge that are needed. If you move slightly out of that concept-based approach, can you look at transferable skills and an awareness of what's in the bigger wide world and start to link that to your PE curriculum? maybe this opportunity is a chance for us to try that and to do that. Julie Stern is a superb leader in concept-based learning, and Alan will touch upon some of the work that she's done a little bit later. And then other really classic models such as sport education. Sport education can be very values driven. If it's led well, it can teach fair play, it can teach how to compete, it can teach respect and gratitude and humility. If it's not well taught, it's a lot of kids playing games with some points for the winners and a league table that's put up on the pinboard after. So it's really looking back at what we can do to make sure that we're making the most of what PE is in school. And we're the gatekeepers of that quality. And we've got to have some pride and we've got to have some standard about what we're doing. And this gives us a great opportunity to start to reflect on it. So there's probably 4 questions that will allow you to structure something that you think might help you reflect about your school. And that's what this is. It isn't a suggestion that things have to change. It's just a pause and reflection and an opportunity for us to have a look at what we could do to make things better. Essentially, for the why of what you're doing, what suits your context? What suits your structure and how you deliver lessons and the age groups you have, the amount of lessons per week and the time per lesson? What suits your staffing and the restrictions there? And all this, again, comes back to what is your why? What's your purpose for PE in your school? I know that some schools, their main purpose for PE is to raise the profile of the school and get good results in local fixtures, which is really sad for a PE experience for a child, but that's the reality of the school you're in. So you've got to try and deal with that and get a good deal for the children in those lessons. But other schools that may be a little bit more forward thinking or have a little bit more creative freedom don't necessarily have to have such a heavy hand on that. We know, and I'm preaching to the converter, that PE can be and is the most important subject in schools, and it will be the most important subject in schools from August when children go back to school. And Alan will explain some of the examples and practices that we've tried with mixed success, admittedly, at the British School Manila. Alan, do you want to put some of what I've just said there into context?
Yeah, thanks, Lewis. Really well put. I'll try and put some meat on the bones to it, because I think we all respond really well to examples and not just concepts that are thrown out there. Now, Lewis touched upon a concept-based approach from a lady called Julie Stern, whose passion in life is getting away from exam-based, examination-based subjects and assessments, and trying to create real-world problems, real-life challenges, and giving kids transferable skills that will benefit them in the long term. And we latched onto that a little bit, and we've had inset with her. But Julie will be the first to admit, in PE, there's actually not a lot out there that give us concrete examples. So it was about us taking a real leap into the uncertainty, failing a lot, and learning from the process along the way. And certainly, if you have a look at her website and her books, that they're well worth a read. And speaking to your senior team, if you're interested in concept-based learning, she's a really good presenter. There's elements of concept-based learning out there at the moment. A lot of the stuff that Dr. Ashley Casey does at Loughborough with his collaborative learning is incorporated in that. It's very values-driven. The Real PE program, the diagram earlier that Ed showed, that's a fantastic values-driven primary curriculum that we've experimented with, and it works. And if it's done properly, it's a program that you can pay to be involved in. But once again, it's not just having that; it's the delivery of it that's really important. If I just try and give you some examples, I think you'll really like what we've tried to do. And the infinite model that we talk about on our website is about research. It's about looking at examples of good practice from around the world. And there's some amazing work going on in Australia, Canada, and New Zealand with regards to PE health and well-being. And at BSM, we made a distinct sort of decision to move away from just being PE and been going more down PE health and well-being. And Lewis will touch upon that a little bit later on with our framework. Let me give you an example of what we do in primary. So our primary curriculum, very similar to what Real PE do, but we didn't buy into that program a number of years ago. It's quite new. So we started about 5 years ago framing our units as real life skills. And an example of that is collaboration. So collaboration is the real life skill. And then we linked it into invasion games. So the concept is about collaboration, invasion games, and then we've got a physical literacy based in that as well. So we have our big idea, like they have in PYP, and I'll give you some examples of big ideas that we've done. So it could be that, what's the relationship between teamwork and winning in invasion games? That might be the big idea that we have for a year 6. It could be, how could we include everybody in our team to make them feel a sense of belonging? It could be, how could we change our rules in our game to be inclusive for all abilities? So you're looking at your big idea. Your learning intentions are all related to collaboration. It's not how can you do a layup. There's nothing, I've used this example before. When they start work, how many people are going to want to do a layup skill in their office? Unless they've got a basketball ring in there. So but they will need to know how to work in a team. They will need to know about the perseverance needed in order to learn that layup, to work out of their comfort zone. So it was taking a different approach, bringing the hidden skills to the forefront instead of just hiding behind the physical skills. And yes, the physical skills are still important, but they're not the front and center anymore. And yeah, you could ask is that PE? But I think we're taking a different approach on it and we're trialing it out. And who's to say we're right or wrong? We're giving it a go. A really nice thing you can do with this approach is tackle real life situations. So when you look at Black Lives Matter at the moment, you can explore that in your lesson by setting up a situation where like, all the tall people are in one team, all the smaller people are in another. And then you play your little game that you have, whatever it may be, your generic invasion game. And then you've got an opportunity to get them in and say, well, how did that feel? And it's the think, feel, act from primary that we can bring in. Well, why is that not fair? What could we do to make that fair? And then you're looking for that transfer of how they can put that into their next lesson, into their life. But they've got something in there that's made them be in a situation that's not fair. And it's a real grasping point, and you see the little light flicker in their mind about, oh yeah, I get that, and then oh that happened where that in real life that person in Syria, them refugees. Why is it fair that them refugees didn't have a home? And it links together with the UN Charter for Sport, and it's just so powerful. And we've got that opportunity to bring that forward. With the primary curriculum going down that line, we made a definite change away from ECA programs influencing the curriculum. That is different. ECA is where our sports are. That's where the kids want to go if they want to learn sport-specific skills. And that's great, brilliant. But there's no way our lessons will be training for our FOBASIA or our BSME games. That's not PE. I'm sorry, that's training, that's coaching, that belongs out of school. And that's the line we went when we picked up at BSM sort of 7-8 years ago. Just to summarise that really then is that it gives every child a chance to achieve, not just the sporty kids. And we've got to realise that. I know we're all sportsmen and we love the fact that we deal with our sporty kids, but probably 80% of the kids we deal with are not that sporty. We deal with about 20% of kids that are really good, maybe even less than that. But we've got to deal for the masses, and I think we've probably been the wrong way around, and we've got to try and address that, because that 80% go out into the world and they might not have the physical literacy skills to be healthy and to be active in the future. We spoke to the FA recently, and I know they're going down a values-driven approach with the 4 corners. You might have heard of that. Look at your school's vision and mission. If they're saying things on their like well-being, health, collaborative approach to learning, student-centered, pupil-centered, if they're using all these phrases, then we need to make sure we're backing that up in our curriculums. We should be living and breathing those values. Does it really matter that our kids can hit a lofted pass with their weaker foot just to get a level 6A on the national curriculum? Or is it better to be looking at what qualities Google and Apple want in their companies? And we have to look towards what jobs they will do in the future and what qualities they will need. Because I look at I've got twins that are 10-year-old, the jobs that they will do probably don't even exist. So we need to provide them with values and skills and attributes that can look and be transferable into the unknown. A great example of a school that lives and breathes its mission and vision is the Green School in Bali. There's also now one in New Zealand, and I know they're opening up in South Africa and in Mexico. They've done away with all formal exams, and they've actually been accredited by the New Zealand government for that. Their end game is their kids to be a good human being. Now, that leads on nicely to what Lewis is going to talk about.
Yeah, and I think there's a few comments coming through. One of them was Alan for Prime Minister, which was absolutely brilliant. But there was one on there that talked about, can there be a balance? Yeah, of course there is. It's different for every single school, and the context of your school will really determine how stuck into this you can be. Going back to what Howard Gardner said, the educational psychologist I referred to earlier, how clever are you, or how are you clever? To add on to what Alan said there, the Green School in New Zealand is the first school ever in New Zealand to allow children to leave school now without formal qualifications that will still get them into college and universities, which is astounding, but surely that's the right direction. Everybody had a giggle when Alan talked about a lofted pass and a 6A. But does that kind of approach devalue what we're trying to do with giving children the skills and the values to move forward? We've also, you've got to look at Harvard. Harvard's a leading institute in the States, and they've said for the first time next year they'll accept students without SAT results. This is a world-renowned established university that's accepting and recognizing that values and the things that children are skilled at are really important, and it isn't just necessarily the data and the outcomes that people are really hung up about. Ed spoke earlier in his intro about, the worry about children coming back to school and not being quite right for it and being a little bit off kilter. And I'd just like to echo what Dave said there in Singapore. I've spoke to overseer colleagues in Vietnam, in Hong Kong, in Taipei, in Singapore, and they've all said that generally the return has been very, very positive and very, very enthusiastic, that the children are a little bit uneasy and lacking in confidence, but they want to be there. They want to be around. And that's probably no surprise, having been out of school for months on end. And if you're not going back till August, September, you're looking at 5-6 months that children will be out of school by then. It's a hell of a long time, and it's a long time for staff as well. So well-being will probably need to be at the forefront of what you're talking about. And a moment on well-being, I think well-being plays an important role in sport. I think we as PE teachers are generally seen as very strong pastoral leaders in schools. We're generally seen as very strong form tutors in schools. And that's in no small part due to the fact that we've had an upbringing around collaboration, about having each other's backs in teams, around looking after people and really caring about them. And I think that we've got a real chance to be able to build on that within PE as well. We at BSM, we use a whole school document that wasn't Alan and I's creation. It was very much a whole school thing that we looked at 3-4 years ago. That has 5 strands around self-regulation, self-acceptance, an active and balanced lifestyle, a capacity for growth and resilience, and a sense of belonging. And those 5 strands are very much formed around the positive psychology research that Seligman and Dan Gilbert have put out, a lot from Geelong Grammar, that I know, Ed, you've got a video from one of their guys on there. They have the Institute of Positive Psychology based there, and we buy into their positive enhanced curriculum. We looked heavily to the well-being and the science of well-being that's led by Laurie Santos at Yale University. And that really meant that once we spoke to our department, we wanted to take this leap into seeing, well, could we be the flag bearers for this? Could we be the people that try and make a difference in school and take this on? And we've done that with mixed successes. We've had a lot of learning processes along the way. Our self-acceptance example, I'll give you a rundown of. Our units aren't based on sport anymore. You don't have a volleyball unit, a football unit, a tennis unit. We don't even have an invasion games unit. We don't have a net games unit anymore in Key Stage 3. Through year 7, 8 and 9 now, our units are entitled the strand of the wellbeing framework. So, for example, our first unit in August is usually self-acceptance. And that's a unit all around trying to stop comparing yourself to others, trying to understand where you are in terms of fitness, trying to understand where you are in terms of physical literacy and the fundamentals that you have as an individual, to give you some opportunity to really look at the comparison of your own data across the year, to help what we create as a personalized timetable of choices from August through to June. We have a unit on self-regulation that looks at organisation, scheduling and prioritising of tasks. We have one through active balanced lifestyles, which obviously runs through all of them being PE based. PE is very much the vehicle in which these are delivered, but that looks a little bit more specifically at taking time to pause and looking at mindfulness as a role in that, looking at the diet of students, the nutritional aspects of different sports, and why sleep is so important as well, which is obviously a big issue for teenagers, especially with the early start to a school day, which doesn't suit them. We also look at a capacity for growth and resilience, and we force children into failure a lot of the time through individual pursuits to get them to understand how that feels and why perseverance is important. We talk about comfort zones and challenge zones and pushing students a lot. And then some of our work is on sense of belonging, which is the more traditional team game. So going back to the lady that asked the question earlier of the balance, yeah, there's some in there. We do look at a sense of belonging. We do look at the teamwork aspects of communication and collaboration. And we're very much scratching the surface of the New Zealand Maori approach, which, you know, really puts well-being front and centre. We're some way behind. But that's our small step forward to try and look at PE in a bigger aspect of things and look at PE in a bigger picture in terms of transferable skills, values, and well-being that's really important moving forward. And I think what's important to just reiterate and mention again is that will look different for every school. It doesn't need to be an all-in approach. We got to a stage where we felt an all-in approach would be right for us. Alan touched upon earlier curriculums like Create Development, superb curriculum, but might not be suited to your context. Don't be tempted maybe to just pick up a cookie cutter curriculum and stick it in your school without thinking about how that affects the wider why and the process for what you're doing. So yeah, we just wanted really to try and identify and present those kind of thoughts as giving this that opportunity to just stop and pause, and before we start to think about how maybe we would lead our volleyball session in term 1 to make it physical distancing safe, actually flip that on its head and think about what we could do instead that might benefit children more, and certainly for longer through their adolescence, and focus more on the values and the well-being. And I know, Will, you're dying to ask a question. I can see you clucking.
No, I'm just conscious of time more than anything, Lewis, and
okay,
aware that I could listen on and talk on with you guys all day. And I absolutely think it's the moment now to think what matters most in PE. What are the outcomes that you're really trying to push for? Try not to be all things to all people, and narrow in and go, what are we going to make sure everyone gets from year 1 or year 6 or by the time they leave us? I think the other really interesting bit is the two of you have clearly worked really hard on this and embedded it in the culture of your school, and you now move.
It's getting there. I wouldn't say it's fully embedded yet.
Okay.
You know, we've only had a year or so at it, but it's getting there.
But the interesting bit is you now go on to new roles into new schools, and it'd be interesting for people to keep in touch with this conversation as well. Which bits will fit in that new mold somewhere else? Because I totally agree, you can't take something off the shelf and put it somewhere. You've got to, first of all, you know, listen and learn from what's happening, what's working, where the gaps are, where the deficits are, to then try and lead, I suppose, and bring something new. So thank you guys, and let's keep the conversation live. Ed, are we on to Neil?
Yes, so for anyone who would want to hear more from Lewis and Alan and their approach to education, again, we did an interview with these gentlemen last week. It will be on the YouTube channel, probably on there now. Would you like to mention the name of your website, Lewis and Alan, as well?
Oh, we'd love to. We'd love to. We took some opportunity through this lockdown to really start to put our heads together for a way that we could continue working together despite moving to different, schools next year. And we came up with our own concept, if you like, inspired by Sinek, which is theinfinitelearners.com. That's our website, and through that we write a variety of articles around different subjects, and we just want to get people thinking. We want to get people thinking, reflecting. Our tagline very much is listen, learn, and share, and doing exactly the kind of stuff that you do in Ear Ed. We think this is superb. But as educators, we've got to strive to be better. The minute we stop wanting to be better, we shouldn't be in education anymore. We should step down and let somebody else have a go. And that's everything that we're about, is just trying to push that forward and help each other along that way.
Alan, anything closing and concise from yourself?
Yeah, we don't know all the answers. It's experimental, it's without borders, it's without constraints, and you know what, we're just giving it a go, and it's pretty raw, and we want to show that we're learning all the time. So yeah, have a look at our website, have a look at our podcasts that are coming out very shortly, and hopefully you just get that little nugget from it.
Excellent, thank you. Neil, over to you, and I'll get your video ready while you introduce it.
Great, thank you. Slight change of topic, I guess. Something that I spend a lot of time thinking about is the children that haven't been accessing it possibly as well as I would like them to, and that has partly driven the context for this interview. I also thought about the children who have thrived, who've lived for this, who live for PE, who live for sport, who are going to want to come back into school all guns blazing, and we could end up with a situation where we just don't know, maybe suddenly things will open up quite quickly, or it will be a gradual process. So what I wanted to make certain was that from a physical standpoint, I don't want to get this wrong for the students. I want to make sure that what I do for them is safe and has their physical well-being at the heart of it, really. So I reached out to a contact, Taif Al-Dalemi, who works at Valiant Clinic here in Dubai, and Taif's a former international sevens player who sees a lot of youth athletes and helps them with their recovery. So we just discussed some of the issues, some of the concerns that people might have about helping children return to sport in lessons from a physical standpoint.
Hang on. I didn't press the share audio. 1 second. Try that again. Here we go.
My name is Neil Statham. I'm head of PE at Heartland International School, and I'm one of the vice chairman of DASA. And joining me today, I've got Taif Al-Dalemi. Hi, Taif.
Hi, Neil.
Do you want to just introduce yourself to everyone who's watching today?
Yeah, my name's Taif Al-Dalemi, and I'm a sports therapist at Valiant Clinic. I've worked a lot with the younger age groups and a variety of schools out here for the last 8 years or so, and happy to join you on this webinar today to discuss detraining and a safe return to sport and activity after the 6-month break that will be the quarantine and summer holidays for the kids that you're working with.
Okay, so one of the things that you and I have been discussing in relation to this webinar is a safe return to sport. So from an injury perspective, what do you think are the key considerations for teachers in getting children back into sport and, more importantly, PE safely and reducing the chance of injury?
So the key thing to think about here is how the effect detraining over that 6-month period will have on them. So in terms of injury risk, we need to look at starting off at a level that is safe and conducive for them to progress on with. So that's the key thing there, is to really acknowledge that there'll be a certain level of detraining and manage that in terms of injury risk.
Okay, so in terms of a typical PE lesson, teachers might have anywhere between 40 and 60 minutes. How would you advise that they allocate that time to help mitigate some of those risks of detraining that you've mentioned?
There's a couple of important things to consider. First of all, in terms of sport or activity choice. So if we look over here at September, ideally within the UAE, we want, if we have access to get them into the pool, both in terms of the heat, but also in terms of the fact that it's a non-weight bearing activity. So it's very safe on the joints for the kids when returning back to a higher level of sport and activity. The next is, if we see them twice a week, is to do something like gymnastics, whereby the kids are developing their resistance to body weight exercises and getting used to proprioception, especially over a 6-month period. We can imagine at this age group will have experienced some growth spurts during that time, and the decrease in coordination associated with that, which is obviously an increase in injury risk. So having both detraining and decrease in coordination due to growth spurts is something that we need to take into account. You mentioned session structure, Neil, and for that, the key to emphasize when they first come back is to put more time into their movement preparation and their recovery. So at the start here, they've come back in September in their gymnastics session. I'd start with at least 20 minutes of movement preparation. So that's all stuff like your basic core control work, you know, Superman, bridging, some single leg stability work, you know, obviously with the younger age groups, you want to make it as interactive and fun as possible. You know, it can be bouncing a ball to each other while standing on one leg, but just so that you get some of that single leg balance training in there. Making sure their fundamental movement patterns are on point. So can they squat? Can they lunge? Can they push? Can they pull? Those sort of actions. So that's what I'd be focusing on at the start in terms of movement preparation. I managed to touch base with a friend of mine who's a PE teacher in China and ask him about his exposure to injuries with the kids coming back post-summer holidays. Post the quarantine. And in China, they actually have PE every single day. And he's had minimal injuries. The only thing that caused injury, and this was throughout the school, was fitness testing. So I know you want to get some baseline measurements in there, but running a bleep test and with kids that are going to be fatigued and deconditioned is not a great idea. This slide here shows the acute versus chronic workload ratio. And you were talking about important principles that PE teachers need to take into account when returning their kids back to PE and the after school sporting activities that take place as well. Basically, to understand this graph, you want to think of what they've done in the last 4 weeks, so the last month, as a ratio to what they've done in the last week. And if that ratio is too high, you put them at an increased risk of injury. So a lot of it is common sense. If they've gone from sitting on their backside for the last month, playing computer games and ordering takeaways and minimal activity, and they come back into school, they're doing PE twice a week, they're doing after school sports events that are made available at the time, you are asking for a bit of trouble there. And in terms of injuries, we see in terms of that load management, we see a lot of chronic injuries like Osgood-Schlatter's, which affects the knee, and Severs, which affects the ankle. In terms of acute, we see a lot of ankle sprains, especially with that decrease in coordination, and then you're getting kids maybe that they've put on a bit of weight and are less fit over the summer period, and they come back and they're doing twisting, turning, multi-directional sports.
I think that it's definitely something that's going to have to be an important consideration for schools and teachers. I think we're going to be faced with a lot of children who are desperate to get back to activity, and we're going to want them to get back to activity too, but there's going to have to be some mediation in there to make sure it's done as safely as possible. If you could summarise, I know it might be difficult, a few key take-homes for teachers, what would they be?
There's a couple here, but the main thing is just be aware that a lot of these kids have had 6 months of detraining. So when they come in initially, we don't want high levels of fatigue in the session and lots of multi-directional movement. So we want to start with activities like swimming, like gymnastics, like dance, that they really get more in tune with their body, and that the emphasis is on movement prep and recovery versus the skill and conditioning part of the session. So that's number one. Number two is in terms of that more chronic load management. So be aware that you're seeing them for the PE sessions, but what's going on outside of that, and try and educate them that you don't want to lose a lot of your pupils through injury early doors just because they jump back into doing all the sports that are available to them.
I'm definitely going to consider readiness for movement more when I'm planning and designing my curriculum on return to what we hope will be physical school in September. Something that's definitely going to be practical within a social distancing setting as well, and is going to be of benefit to children. The second thing I've written down here is the urgency to return to sport, and the desire for students to be competitive again will be high, but it's something that's going to have to be managed carefully and practically by teachers. Fantastic. Well, thanks very much for your time today. On screen there, you can see Taif's contact details as well for those people who are based in Dubai. I can personally recommend him as an excellent person to help you get back on the road to recovery, and someone who is great at working with students, young athletes as well, from having been there and done it and won the t-shirt himself. So thank you very much for your time today, Tafe, and we'll see you later.
I mean, you might argue that looking at me now, there's still a long way on the recovery road to go. But something just to finish off on that session about the Dubai context, something that a lot of us have been reflecting on, and it's been great to listen to perspectives from other parts of the world, is that we do have this great opportunity in Dubai. You know, we've got in DASA, we've got 80-member schools, we've got facilities here, which lots of schools would love, some of which are the envy of lots of parts for the world. And I think what I really want to get out of this, and want other people to consider in the Dubai context as well, is that if we're considering that some things might need to change, that this shouldn't just be about social distancing, and it shouldn't just be about post-COVID and about what can we put in as a placeholder until things get back to the way that we want them to be, and then we can go back to where we were before. You know, I'm thinking about the percentage of time and the percentage of money, and weighing that up against what percentage of children does that reach. You know, the 80% of children here get 20% of the money? Probably not. It's probably more likely the other way. In terms of access to qualified teachers, to qualified coaches here, are we actually looking at a situation where 20% get 80% of the resources? And if that's the situation, and now we've been presented with this opportunity to change it, we need to seize this opportunity. So the question I'm asking is, can we do more for more children? And I hope that on the back of this collaboration in this region, the answer is absolutely yes. Something that I'm going to take inspiration from is, I'm a big Tom Sherrington fan, and he talked his book, The Learning Rainforest, and I often go back to it, and he talks about this metaphor of the roots, the trunk, and the branches of the tree. And this just feels like a great natural starting point for me. And he talks about the roots as establishing conditions for learning, which I think listening to what Lewis and Alan are doing in Manila, I think it's a great chance to re-establish the conditions for learning and think about what the learning is, and then build the knowledge and all the other aspects after that. But hopefully a unique opportunity for schools in Dubai, just to summarize, with such a condensed population, with such great resources at hand. Hopefully an exciting time off the back of this, and a catalyst for change.
Thank you. Gentlemen, I'm feeling very inspired and energized at the moment. This is great stuff. Lots of bold statements coming out from people here. It takes courage to say this to our professional peers, you know, but it's comes from a place that's revolved around their students, and that's the most important thing. I'm going to launch one final poll for you guys to answer on, and head over to Will, who's going to look at all those Q&As. So please, last chance to vote. And panel, if Will directs a question to you, if we can keep it concise and to the point, because we've done 95 minutes now. I'm getting
well into extra time and going to get injured. Yeah. Is that what you're saying, Ed?
Go on, Will.
No, I was going to say, conscious of time, we've had some great questions in, so I'm thinking we'll perhaps try and get through 5 or 6 of them, and if we're not done in 10 minutes, then perhaps we've failed. All right, we failed this time. We're still learning. Okay, so again, just looking through these questions, the one that's right at the top in terms of 51 responses, I'm actually going to throw back at you, Ed. So lots of concerns around swimming. I know you mentioned Swim England and the really good guidance that's come from them, but just wondered if in your reading, whether you've picked up on anything else.
Yeah, so it seems with swimming, the companies can do it safely. We've seen this recently in the UAE, people back to pools. I think with swimming, it's more the lack of ventilation, particularly in indoor pools. It's the changing rooms is an issue rather than being in the water itself. But the Swim England guidelines are the best ones I could find. I'll also send out videos that swim companies here in the UAE have done as a demonstration of how they will deliver a safe session. So that will be part of the email that you receive tomorrow if you've not already seen that. But it's looking promising, but I just think it's just going to be more secondary to just getting people moving again in more open air spaces.
Brilliant, thank you. And I guess that's what opens into Paula's question about exercising safely in large groups. And I'm probably going to throw that at you, Dave, thinking to the fact that you've been back in school 3 weeks. So any top suggestions for exercising safely with big numbers?
We have the maximum we've had in a class is 24, and we take them outside. 75% of the lessons that we've designed are outside. The one lesson that we do inside is we do a dance followed by a yoga session, and we have 2 meter spacing on the floor. So we have 2 meter spots on the floor, and we put the mats on those spots. The mats don't move, and they're cleaned after every session. So students come in and they put their bag and their mask, their drinks bottle at the front of the mat, and they work in that space. The new guidelines that have come out is that it should be, I think it's 3 square meters per child as a maximum capacity. So it depends how big your hall is, but we really follow, rather than calculating the spacing, we kind of follow, can we keep kids 2 meters apart indoors? And so really, we wouldn't be doubling groups. We wouldn't be putting 40 children in a hall in any case, no.
And that's perhaps a nice moment to bring Chris in to see if he's got anything to add, but also the rain factor. Certainly for me in England and many that are tuning in, there's that fear, isn't there, of, so what do we do? Any suggestions?
No, not sure really. With some, again, it's a little bit of trial and error. Again, based on the kind of options that you had prior to coming back into school. We had a varied amount of options that we had on our VLE. We used Canvas, and we're fortunate enough our students have Surface Pros each. So wet weather lessons, students are organised to, if we know it's going to be wet that day, they bring their laptops down in their bags, they put them outside the Astro, we work on the Astro as much as we possibly can, and then we come inside, we march them in, we back up to the sports hall again where they're sort of 2 meters apart, and then they're completing something online. And that could be they're designing a kit, it's officiating, quizzes, or if they've chosen jump rope as an example, one of our activities, they're sort of planning their routine during that time. So it's keeping them busy, keeping them mindful on PE and sport.
Yeah, perfect, thanks. And Alan, seeing as you're going to be that future Prime Minister, I've had a with changing rooms for a long time, and actually the suitability of changing rooms for kids' well-being and their emotional well-being. Any ideas on how getting kids changed or not could be a solution?
I think we can use a primary model, can't we, where they come into school changed. Obviously that presents hygiene issues. I know my two are right smelly little things. I dread to think what they were like after after a session, but I think it can do with creative timetabling, isn't it? It's going back to what your parameters are in your school, and could you timetable at the end of day or in a break slot after it? It totally depends on the context, but I think PE days is a kit day, isn't it? I think that makes a lot of logical sense.
And being solutions focused, that's the point, isn't it? You know, trying to break down those barriers. Yeah, perfect. And then Lewis, I think you're probably the best to answer on this. And I know I circulated earlier in the chat, Claude, who is president at the European Union for PE Association, was talking about there can be no education without physical education. And I think there's a lot of concern out there that, okay, maybe these bubbles will go back and will happen for classroom lessons. But now's our moment, isn't it, to talk about, we're not comfortable with it just being exercise, and we're certainly not comfortable with it not happening at all in the timetable. How are you going to tackle that one?
Oh, you're right. I mentioned earlier about 7 possible strands that you could have in PE, and every school's ingredients in that little recipe, as I phrased it, will be very, very different. And I think, again, it goes back to context. I don't think there's one thing that suits everybody there. I think that some schools that are really in a position where they're forced by neighbouring schools to be very competitive in team sports will still invariably be forced to do maybe a more team sport heavy curriculum. I think that the whole thing of what we're doing here is just presenting different ideas and really looking at what can happen in the next 5 to 10 years to reframe PE and really make it physical education and not sport and not physical activity.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lewis. And then Niall, obviously, sorry, Neil, even there's a lot of comments, obviously a big audience from Dubai, and some of those pragmatics around, DASA fixtures and local guidelines. I don't know if you've got anything specific.
Yes, I mean, what I would say so far is that Dubai Sports Council have issued quite detailed guidance, although so far it's been aimed towards sports clubs and sports academies. But I think if you were to take that as a starting point, it's going to at least set you on the right path to what your likely restrictions and constrictions are going to be. So in Dubai, there is now return to swimming, sports clubs, football academies are operating as long as they follow those procedures. So when I'm starting to think about what it's going to look like, I'm using them as a starting point and trying to develop policies from those.
Perfect, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's worth adding there, Will, as well, is, sport still has a role to play. It's still really important. It's not going to go away. It's just where that sport is and is the right place for that sport in extracurricular clubs and sport-specific sessions where coaches, teachers would be more than willing to go through specifics of, going back to the examples Alan gave of layups and lofted passes. Is that the place that those things go rather than in PE? And can we be a little bit more forward-thinking and a little bit more holistic in PE?
And I guess thinking of the parallels with whether it be English and reading or maths and the use of those skills in later life, I think sometimes we think of ourselves in PE as being something very different. And we've got to be careful that we don't turn sport into a dirty word, because it's not.
Yeah. No, it's not at all. We love sport. I think the most popular thing within PE teaching bodies is that people got involved because they loved playing sport and they loved being around sport and they loved competing. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's just putting sport in the right place to give kids the right opportunities to progress within their lessons.
Will, can I just come in on something, Will? I suppose it's digressed a little bit from what Niall was saying when we were talking about sport coming back and ECAs. But I just wanted to add at this point that certainly in Singapore, and I imagine in most countries, that sport is probably a little bit far down the line from where we all are at the moment. And the biggest reason for that, rather than the nature of the activities, is the mixing of children. All our classes currently are their tutor-based classes, and they're the students that they move around with for the whole day. As soon as you start having teams of football clubs, and you have students coming from potentially 16 different classes or 8 different classes, multiple year groups, then you have a much greater risk of having a spread of the virus if something were to happen. So sport, in the sense of bringing groups of kids from mixed tutor groups, mixed year groups, that's quite a long way down the line, I think, for us. For sure, and I would imagine that's similar for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a 2021 conversation, most likely, isn't it?
Mm.
Yeah, perfect. Ed, I've scribbled a bit of a summary and some reflections, but also a bit of a call to action. But I'm just conscious of time and thinking I'll email it over to you, and it can go out with that.
Yeah,
is that cool?
Absolutely fine. Yeah. So, Will, did you want to do your closing comments, or would you want to include that in the email? Yeah,
I'll put it in the email. I guess my closing comments are massive thank you, Ed, for pulling this together, Andy for your intro, and colleagues for giving up their time on a Sunday. We're still at well over 200 people tuned in, and I think it's been really valuable. But I guess the call to action bit is keep the global conversation going. We can learn so much from each other. Things have changed a lot during this time, so look carefully at who you can help and who needs the most help when they return to school. And then I guess that 80-20 rule of look after yourself and put the effort into where it can have the biggest impact. I really liked what Alan said about the think, feel, act, and then transfer. And I guess my big thing is about trying to observe what's going on, listening to everything, thinking on that, and then find a creative solution, find a way to respond that will change something, that will do some good. It's a nice opportunity to do that, isn't it? So yeah, massive thanks everybody.
Yeah, thank you all. Thank you to the attendees watching. Judging by this poll, I think we've certainly helped a lot of people, which I'm very happy about. In the email you'll get tomorrow, lots of goodies in there. The document of the summary of international guidance, links to all these other documents, and things from presenters and links to their websites and such. There will be a survey in there, post-webinar survey. 2 minutes of your time would really help us in the hours we've put into putting this together to make sure that we can keep on doing them in future and doing them well. Thank you. What a testament to our subject. Hundreds of teachers here, PE teachers from across the world, coming together. The final days of school year, which is one to probably forget in many ways, but lots of things to remember and take from this. There's been so many positives, connecting with the people such as yourselves watching and the panel. This reinforces my belief that PE teachers are highly driven professionals, always striving to improve, and probably the most resilient in the school. So for me, my closing comment is that's going to be paramount in September, when PE departments around the world step up and will lead from the front on well-being, on social interaction, on getting the kids back into education. And I think that's what we do best. So thanks again. We're going to end it there. Anyone else like to say anything? No? Okay, mic drop. Gentlemen, when I press end, I'm not going to be able to see you all. It's literally going to stop, so we can't even talk afterwards. But thank you very much, everybody. And see you next time. Have a lovely summer holiday.
Cheers, Ed. Thank you, mate.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.